Good morning, good afternoon for some of you. Welcome to today's training webinar, Guidelines for Implementing the New 10-Point Rubric in Undergraduate Courses in the School of Management Systems and Technology. For those of you who are not familiar with the GoToMeeting functions, the red arrow on your control panel will expand and collapse the panel when selected. The audio area of the panel has two radio buttons. You can select to use either the built-in mic and speakers on your computer, or you can call in using your telephone. There is a chat area to share comments and ask questions during the session. And please watch for the survey link at the end of this training webinar, where I'll be placing one in there for you to go in and complete a Qualtrics survey. There's also a raise hand button if you should have a question during the session. Please click on that button. And lastly, if you are having difficulties, please call the 1-800 number listed on your screen for technical support, and they should be able to assist you. Okay, today's presenters are Dr. John Borden. He's a core faculty member from the School of Information Systems and Technology. And we also have Dr. Cheryl Christensen. She's the assessment coordinator for the College of Management and Technology. And then myself, I'm one of the faculty specialists for the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I will be moderating today. Before we begin presenting the information, we would like to give a special thanks to the following School of Information Systems and Technology members who participated in both the development and of this training webinar and the development of the new 10-point rubrics. So a special thank you to Vladimir Gubanov, Mike Kolta, Brooke Estabrook Fishinghawk, Lisa Ward, and Julie Weeble. Thanks so much. Upon completion of this webinar, participants will be able to describe a rubric, evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of using rubrics, describe how rubrics can be used for course-level assignment grading and program-level assessments, and understand the importance of inter-rater reliability when using rubrics to grade assignments across a curriculum. All faculty who received the invitation to attend this webinar should have received a baseline assessment assignment. We will be polling the results of this assignment in about 10 minutes, so please make sure to have all of your numerical values available. If you did not have time to do this baseline assignment prior to this webinar, we ask that you refrain from participating in the polling because we are collecting the results and we will be using them in further studies. So at this point, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Cheryl Christensen.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you're located. It's great to have you here with us today. First thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about why we're discussing a set of guidelines for the new 10-point rubric. Well, first of all, as a result of the site visit team, we learned that they were somewhat concerned that there appeared to be possible grade inflation across the BSIT program. When looking at the BSIT and BSCIS faculty grading using the Lore Book data for the 2011-2012 academic year, it did demonstrate that there was wide variation regarding how the 4-point rubrics were being used. For example, in a number of courses, it was noted that one faculty member gave almost all A grades, while another faculty member gave a variety of grades, A through D. It was also noted that some faculty only assigned rubric scores using whole numbers, such as 4, 3, 2, 1, while other faculty used decimal grades. So let's take a look at assessment at Walden University in general. Outcome assessment is encapsulated by 3 core tasks. First, defining what students are expected to learn as a result of their program. Second, measuring what students learn as a result of their program. And third, using this data to improve student learning. There are 4 themes common across the university. First, assessment at Walden is a means by which we also communicate to students, faculty, staff, and the broader public what our students are learning and what the university does to improve learning. In addition, we recognize that faculty are key participants in all facets of the outcomes assessment process. Third, we use our assessment data to meet students where they are and to facilitate their growth to appropriate levels of proficiency. And finally, assessment at Walden University supports the university mission by consistently paying attention to how student learning is applied to professional and the public good. So let's talk a little bit about rubrics. So what is a rubric? A rubric is essentially a guide listing specific criteria for grading or scoring academic papers, projects, or tests. There are a number of advantages of using rubrics, and we're just going to kind of highlight a few of those here. First, using rubrics can provide consistent standards across the curriculum. Second, rubrics can actually provide faculty a fantastic teaching tool and students a tremendous learning tool. And third, rubrics can actually help students become more critical of their own work as well as the work of others. One of the things we have to be real prior to implementing rubrics is to make sure that the rubric is set up properly, make sure that faculty are implementing the rubric fairly consistently across the board. So there are a number of questions that we want to ask ourselves during the development and testing of any rubric. One question we need to ask ourselves is, does the rubric address all the appropriate assessment and grading criteria? Are the criteria in the rubric clearly stated? Are the rubric and associated scale being used properly? And finally, is the rubric being scored consistently by multiple faculty across the curriculum? This is also related to as inter-rater reliability. The Walden approach is to essentially use a single rubric for grading assignments and program assessment. By having this approach, it helps us facilitate assignment grading and program assessment data collection. It better informs faculty and students regarding student learning expectations at a more granular level, and it empowers students to take more responsibility regarding their performance. In addition to the items I've just talked about, we're also very concerned about rubric validity and reliability. In particular, we're interested in content validity, which is the extent to which the rubric provides an appropriate measure of all facets of student work on any given assignment. Predictive validity is whether the rubric score on an assignment predicts student attainment of associated unit and program learning outcomes. And reliability, there's two kinds of reliability we're primarily interested in. Inter-rater reliability, which is the degree of agreement among faculty completing the same rubric on a set of assignments. That's what we're kind of taking a look at today. And inter-rater reliability is the degree of agreement among repetitions of application of a rubric by a single faculty member. We're going to go ahead and move forward, and Dr. John Barton said more specifically about the 10-point rubric.
Thank you, Cheryl and Lita, and welcome everybody to our webinar. I'm excited that so many people decided to join us. Again, our focus in this webinar is sort of introducing this new 10-point rubric that we're going to be using in the BSIT and the BSCIS programs. Many of you are also aware that in August, Walden University published a new rubric guide where they recommended use of the 10-point rubric across the entire Walden curriculum. So I think we may start seeing more and more of these 10-point rubrics popping up. And to the best of my knowledge, we're the first program to actually move in this direction, although as soon as I say the best of my knowledge, somebody will raise their hand and say, oh, no, we have it already. But basically, we started looking into this over a year ago before the Walden University recommendations came out. And the reason we developed this rubric, I think Cheryl kind of covers those, but it was primary for two reasons. One is we found out that faculty were not consistently applying the 4-point rubric in their classes. And when we looked at the issues there, it wasn't necessarily a faculty issue as what we felt it was more a problem with the rubric itself. And one of the things that we obviously do in Walden is we use our rubrics for two different purposes. One is we use the rubric to grade student papers, and that's the one as faculty that we're most aware of, that we see on a daily basis. But the second thing is we use these rubrics for assessment to assess how well our students are achieving program and unit learning outcomes. As it turned out, within the BSIT and BSCIS program, the original 4-point rubric, which we're going to look at a little bit later on in the webinar, was designed for assessment. It was not designed for grading. So there were huge issues with it. We just couldn't really use it well for grading. And faculty were kind of thrown out there and had to figure out, how do I use this thing? So what we've done now is, by taking a look at developing the 10-point rubric, we now have a rubric that can be used for both assessment and grading, and hopefully do a better job of both. Now, what I would like you to do is just take a quick look. We're going to be going through this rubric in some detail in the next 30 minutes, but take a look at the evaluation column there. And so the way these rubrics are going to be implemented, they're going to be included in the classrooms starting March 4th, by the way, in the BSIT classrooms, as Excel spreadsheets. So what the faculty will see, they'll see this rubric that looks just like this. This is from an assignment in the iTech 1010 class. It's the assignment that those of you who did the baseline work did. You're going to see nothing listed in the evaluation column, and of course you'll see nothing listed in the total points that the student is awarded. And then as you enter values in there, it'll be relative to the quality of the work that the student did. So let's move on to the next slide, Lita. Okay, so one of the things, again, that we're doing here, besides talking about this rubric and defining how it can be used for both grading and assessment, is we really want to establish a higher level of inter-rater reliability for our faculty. And the only way to do that is we need to have the same basic understandings of how to apply this rubric. So that is probably, besides introducing the rubric, probably the #1 focus of this webinar is to try and bring all the faculty in line and agreement on how to apply and evaluate student work using this rubric. So we're going to be looking at inter-rater reliability, again, the consistency of applying the new rubric across the faculty. And those of you who were in the undergraduate program have already completed using a rubric on a couple of assignments, so we're going to be polling. To anybody else who chose to complete the assignment before the webinar, you're welcome to join in. And we're going to be using this data to kind of compare to how the level of inter-rater reliability before the webinar, and then we're going to do an assignment at the very end of the webinar, and we're going to compare that number. And we're not actually going to have that available right now because we can't do that quickly, but we'll still take a look at it. Now, one of the things that we're going to have you do is Lita's going to be using a polling tool here in a minute to enter your results. And as she indicated earlier, please make sure you've got that available to you. And by the way, later on, you're going to need to use that same assignment and rubric. So if you haven't already done so, make sure that you've got that available either on your screen or in a printout. And again, that's the actual assignment itself and the copy of the rubric that you were all given prior to the webinar. So one of the things, many of you may have used decimals when you filled out the rubric, and that's okay, but however, due to the limitations of our polling tool, we can only collect whole numbers. So if you did use decimals, please just round your decimals up or down. Again, 0.5 you can round up, 0.4 and down you can round down. And that'll still give us a good value. We'll talk a little bit later about whole numbers versus decimals. So Lita, are you ready to start the polling process?
I am. So in a few moments, a slide is going to appear on your screen. Please click on the choice that represents the value you assessed in a baseline assessment when prompted for each area. And as John mentioned, I'm going to repeat, just please choose a whole number, even if you did come up with a decimal value. So without further ado, I'm going to launch the poll and give you a few seconds to complete. Talia, and her configuration is the first score. I see about 8% of you have voted so far. If you are going to input, if you could do so in the next few moments. All right. I think with 8% in, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And these are our results.
Okay, and as you can see, we've got a pretty good spread here on how people evaluated Talia. It looks like we've got some people who evaluated her at a 9, which would basically be like an A-, and several people who evaluated her as a C-. And that's fine. As we said in the initial information we sent out, there are no right and wrong answers to this. But what we're trying to do is demonstrate where faculty are at with this. And I want you to think about, for those of you that completed this, where you fit in this and why. If you gave her a 9, well, why did you give Talia a 9? And why do you think other people might have given her a 7? And, if I were to look at this as an evaluator and try to say, well, what should Talia have gotten, I'd probably say, wow, it looks to me like she probably should have gotten an 8, which is a B-. Although, again, as faculty, we each have different ways of evaluating, and we look for different things. But the whole purpose behind rubrics is to try and put all the faculty on the same page when they're doing the evaluations. And like I say, we'll talk a little more about the rubric later. So let's go on to the next evaluation item, Lita.
All right, and when I'm pulling that up, I do want to address a question that was asked. An attendee was asking where he could find the assessment. It was sent out prior to this webinar, so if you want to email me or Dr. John Borden after the webinar, we can most certainly send that out to you. Okay, the next polling question is Talia and justification. You should see that in a moment. If you can please place your vote, that would be great. All right, once again, about 8% of you spoke. Let's see, we just topped up to 12. Maybe I'll give it another moment. All right, a lot more feedback on Talia and justification. I'm going to close the poll. We have 20% in, and these are our results. Okay, and again, we don't really have time to do an in-depth analysis, or this would have been a 2 or 3 hour webinar. But I do want you to all kind of take a look at where your scores are compared to other faculty member scores and think about, why did I rank it? Let's say if you're one of the people who gave her a 9, why did I give her a 9? And why did some other people give her a 7? If I gave her a 7, what did somebody else see that maybe gave her a 9? Just kind of think about these things. And again, we're going to be talking a little bit about, trying to come up with a consistent way of rating our students. From a student perspective, I think you can see that, if I were a student, which one of these faculty members would I like to have grading my work? And the answer is, wow, I'd like to have the one who gave me a 9. Our goal is to get it to where we're all giving Talia, not necessarily the same grade, but maybe we're all giving her either an 8 or a 7, or giving her an 8 or a 9. So let's move on, and I'm going to probably not talk so much with future ones. All right. The next one is Talia and what you assessed her for cost. That should be appearing on your screen. About 12% in. We'll give it a couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to be closing the poll. 16% of you responded, and this is what you had to say.
Okay. Actually, we're fairly consistent on this one. That's good. Maybe this was a little easier one for us to all evaluate. But again, just take a look at that real quick, and then we'll move on to the next item.
All right. The next one is Talia form and style. If you can take a few moments. Okay, we're at 16% again. Oh, 20, it's going up a little. All right, I'm going to be closing the poll of the 20% response rate. This is what we had.
Okay, again, just take a look at how you compare to other faculty. It looks like we have a little bit of consistency, except there's a spread in there. So, now, one of the interesting things about form and style, I think that this, for me anyway, as a faculty member, is one of the more difficult ones to evaluate, especially when you're looking at a freshman class versus, say, a senior class, and of course when you get into graduate student classes. But I feel that one of the things that a lot of faculty comment on is to what extent are we supposed to require the students to follow the APA style. Now, it is mentioned in this form and style item. APA is mentioned. And I just want you to all know that the College of Undergraduate Studies has come out with a new set of guidelines and recommendations for how to evaluate undergraduate student writing. And it's actually scaffolded, so we have higher expectations for seniors, so we do juniors, so we do sophomores, so we do freshmen. And this document should be coming out, and those of you that are teaching undergraduate students should be seeing it within the next few months anyway, and it's going to start to be integrated into the classroom. So hopefully that's going to help us in addressing this question of how are we supposed to evaluate form and style. So thank you.
All right, now we're going to move on to Bob. As you'll see on your screen, if you could give Bob the score that you gave him for configuration. Should be coming up. There we go. We're at 12%. I'll give you all a few more seconds to input your score for Bob for configuration. Okay, I'm going to be closing the poll at 16% response. And this is how it appeared.
Okay, we've got, again, a spread here. I'm just
Please. Okay, we have about 12% of the votes in, 15. All right, I'm going to be closing the polling. We're up to 19, actually. I'll give it one more second. All right, I'm going to close with a 19% response rate, and this is what you all had to say about that.
Okay, that's actually fairly consistent scoring. That's nice to see. You guys, by the way, overall are a little more consistent than our group was last night. They had a little more spread, I think, overall on both Bob and Talia. So again, take a look at where you fit, and let's move on to the next one.
All right. We're going to launch one for Bob and what you gave him for cost. About 12% are in. If you have the score, if you want to input it in the next moment, please. Okay. We're closing it with a 12% response rate, and this is what we have.
Okay, again, I would say that when we get everybody grouped just in two numbers like that, 7s and 8s, that we're being fairly consistent here. It's very interesting. Okay, does anybody have any comments on why they rated the way they did, a 7 or an 8 on Bob's cost? Raise your hand. Anybody like to comment on that, either orally or submit something?
If you want to type it in the question box or hit your raise hand function, and we can unmute you so you can speak.
Now, if you were a group of students, I'd say you guys are a quiet bunch, and I'd be out there picking on you. But I know you're all busy with other things. It's tough to put yourself out there in front of the whole group, but that's okay. Let's go on to the next item.
Surely. This is the very last one for this set. It's for Bob and his form and style. If you could take a moment to let us know what you gave Bob for form and style. Oh, Bob's not doing so good. Okay, Bob's doing a little better. We have 8% in, 12%. All right, I'm going to close this one out at 12%, and here are our results for his last one.
Well, that's interesting. Looks like we didn't have a big response, but it was quite spread out. And, you know, just these were actual student papers submitted in a 1010 class when I taught it a few months ago. And I actually ended up, Talia, relative especially to the rest of the class, her response was actually a fairly good response. And I think I ended up giving her somewhere on the 10-point scale of the equivalent of 85 to 90%. I was one of the faculty members, or am one of the faculty members, who did not stick to assigning 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. I actually assigned decimal values, and I kind of figured things at 90%, 95%, 85%, and created associated decimals to go with those. So when I would grade a student's item, I would think to myself, now, is this B work, or is it B minus work? Is it C work, or is it C minus work? And that was kind of the way that I worked, and I came up with decimals that measured that. So Talia ended up with around an 85 to 90%, whereas Bob, I saw some real problems with him, as many of you did, and I ended up giving him, it was around 65%, and I think that this is where it's important that we give feedback, and I gave Bob quite a bit of feedback. I gave Talia a little less feedback. I tend to do that, but we'll talk more about that later. So does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? Want to raise your hand? If not, we'll just move on. Okay, so as we indicated, for those of you that didn't do the assignments, you've probably been sitting there twiddling your thumbs. Maybe you found it interesting to see how your colleagues evaluated things and the spread they had, but now we're going to kind of get back and focus on things. We're going to talk about the rubrics specifically. And I know we've all worked with rubrics. Again, those of you who are in the BSIT and BSCIS, these are exactly the same rubrics that we used in the 4-point system, except we just converted it to 10. Now, the exception to that are the discussion rubrics. As you all know, our discussion rubrics were generic. Every rubric was the same. That's no longer the case. The first 2 and sometimes 3, but always usually 2 questions in each discussion rubric has been changed to specifically focus on the assignment and or the learning outcome that we're trying to measure. But basically what we see, the criterion and description, the description, this gets down to the concept of what we described earlier as content validity. In other words, does this description in the rubric match the assignment? And ideally they match, but are they 100% perfect? No, they're not. As a matter of fact, last night somebody pointed out that even with this particular assignment, that there was a little bit of variation between the description and the assignment. And it's our job as faculty, if we notice that, we've got 2 choices. One is to just tell the students exactly what we're going to be measuring before they complete the assignment. The other is to submit a modification of course maintenance and say, look, we need to change this rubric or change the assignment, and that would be something you'd submit to the lead faculty member to make that decision as to which is appropriate. So I think we need to take responsibility for these things. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. The evaluation I've already talked about a little bit. Again, the evaluation is a number that we input. And we're going to talk quite a bit about these evaluation items here in a minute. So why don't we move on to the next slide. So this is our scale that we use. Now, I know that some of you use an actual 2-dimensional rubric where you list exactly what's expected for each criteria to get a 10 or to be mastery, competent, developing, deficient. We choose to have a generic scale that we then map into our 1-dimensional assignment-specific rubric. There are some downsides to that. I will tell you, I mean, and it's just because, we aren't able to specifically say exactly what the students are supposed to do with each assignment to get values. In my opinion, and from what I've read in the research, there are some upsides to it, though, too. Those 2-dimensional rubrics sometimes are so complicated that students in particular just don't read every word. So we've settled on, years ago, this particular approach where the details are listed in 1 dimension of basically this is the performance level that we're expecting you to achieve on each assignment item, and then we map that to this scale. So a mastery item, in order to give a student a 10, we expect them to be an exceptional answer, complete, clear, and exceeding the performance criterion. Now this is an A+, 100%. And on a particular item, the assumption is, especially at the freshman level and somewhere at the sophomore level, we're not, only a certain percentage of our students are going to achieve this. They're just not going to be that perfect. I'm not saying they can't. I find at the junior, senior level, I'm more likely to get these kind of students and assign these kind of grades. But that's a good thing. That means our students are learning how to read the rubrics, how to complete the assignments. They're getting better and better and better. And that's our goal, is for our students to improve their performance. Competent, which is an 8 to a 9. This is somebody, they met the performance criteria. They actually answered all the items. We're not giving them a 10. We're giving them an 8 or a 9, which is an A- or a B-. And the difference between an 8 and a 9, basically, to get if they got an 8, there's more of the second set items in them. They need to clarify something, provide a little more depth. Or maybe there were several items they needed to address, and they didn't thoroughly address 1 or 2 of them. It's absolutely critical at this point that we give the students feedback and tell them what they could have done to achieve the 10. And what are they missing? And just 1 or 2 things. It doesn't need to be 100% complete, but we need to point that out to them in the feedback section. Developing, which is a 7. This is equivalent to about a 70%, a C minus. These students are missing some detail. It's not fully developed, and they're starting to approach the performance criteria, but they haven't got there. Again, in our feedback, we need to tell them what's missing. Now, we don't necessarily need to tell them everything to get themselves to a 10, but we want to at least tell them enough that we could get them up to a 9 if they had included those things in there. Deficient, this is a 6, 60%, or a D minus. This is a pretty weak response, yet the student obviously put something into it. I find I have 2 kinds of students who give this response. One is those who really are struggling with the material, and it's a real challenge for them. And a second group of students are those who are just being a little lazy. They didn't get to the assignment till the last minute. They didn't put a lot of time into it. And one of the things that as faculty members I think we need to try and do, and this is, boy, how do we read the student's mind, is to try and determine what that is. And sometimes we can do that by comparing over time, comparing students' responses, say, in the discussions, their application responses, comparing their previous applications to their current application. And, you know, we need to decide, do we need to give the student a pep talk and say, wait a minute, you need to put more time into it? Or do we need to be really working with them and making recommendations for how they can learn better and be more successful? And this is a challenging student when you've got a student who you're giving a 6 to. 1 through 5, these are minimal. Obviously, these are Fs, 10 to 50%. And these are students, again, they could really be having issues. I find that, especially at the freshman level, if I'm giving a student a grade here, it's typically because they just didn't put any time into it. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. If they're an exception and I gave a 1 through 5 and it's because they're not grasping the material, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering if they're really in the right program, or if they even have the skills to succeed as college students. And boy, those are tough ones. And I really struggle with those, and I know many of you do as well. Finally, the idea is we don't give zeros unless the student simply did not submit anything. So a 0 is, you know, if we see a 0 in the grade book, that means the student didn't submit the assignment. Now, at this point in time, when Walden does its assessment, they look at the system looks at a 0 as an F. And what is assessment? Again, remember I talked about content validity earlier. That is, the description in the rubric matches the assignment. The second one is predictive validity. And what that is how well does a particular rubric item predict a student's learning of unit or program level outcomes. Now, when we start saying that a 0 is an F, and we include that into our assessment process, when in fact the student didn't even complete the assignment, we're skewing the assessment downward, because we're saying, okay, here's a student who did not achieve the program objective or the program outcome, when in effect we don't know if the student achieved the program outcome because they didn't even complete the assignment. So hopefully starting by this summer anyway, and maybe sooner, we are going to be, currently we do our assessment at the assignment level. So we take a look at the total assignment. We say the student got an 8 on this assignment. They met the associated program outcome. But there's some issues there, and I'm not going to go into that here, but hopefully starting soon, we're going to actually be able to pick out an individual item within the rubric and say if the student got an 8 or a 9 or a 10 on this item, they achieved the program outcome, or at least this is one facet of that program outcome that they achieved. Of course, we have to have several facets to collect the entire program outcome. But this is not an assessment workshop, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. But I just wanted to cover that information. Does anybody have any questions on this scale and how to apply it? You can raise your hand or type in a message. Okay, let's go on. I would like to try and get some feedback on these next couple of questions. So I've described to you what I think a 10 is. What do you think? What is mastery? What does it take to get a 10? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Again, you can raise your hand, open your mic. This can be anybody. This isn't limited to the BSIT and BSCIS faculty.
Not seeing any hands or questions as of yet. Oh, we have one hand. Lawrence Pallure, I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Lawrence.
All right, thank you. Okay, the only comment that I have to make, and I guess the question is, you're starting at the top, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of minimal expectations. And I say minimal expectations as set forth in the assignment or the application. And then you look from that baseline standard and work your way up. So I guess it's a toss-up in measuring the, and I'm trying to think of what you're next to on the tabs were, but going down on the rubric. If you start at the minimal and say, okay, minimal expectation is what? And I think we would all agree that a minimal effort of what the expectations, in other words, the deliverable was there, but it's just minimal. It's okay. And that would be the equivalent of a C grade or a 70 or maybe a high 60 in this scale. And then work your way up, and I've indicated to my students that if they do more and contribute more and show more effort, then you end up with a higher grade and obviously the 10 value to the point where it knocks your socks off, which is usually pretty tough to get to, especially at the entry level undergraduate. So that's all I have to say was that I'm not questioning, you know, what that mastery is, but mastery has got to be at the point where they really are showing that they've got it, and it's well above that minimal expectation.
Okay, and I think that overall I'd agree with you, and I think that at least within our program, that's the same concept that we're hoping faculty will now begin to use. Is in the past we used to give out a lot of 4s, partly because if you gave a 3, you were given a 75%, right? So a 4 you gave to the exceptional student, to the excellent student, to the very good student, even to the good student, anywhere up to a B, down to a B minus or even a C plus, because you'd rather round up than round down. So, but we're saying from now on, as Lawrence just said, this is the exception. This is the one that they go beyond the expectation expressed in the rubric itself. So thank you for that. Next item.
You know, Michael Colta has his hands up. Michael, I'm going to take you off mute. There we go, Michael. Mike, do you have a mic? Speaker? If you do have a question, if you want to type it in the question box, if your speaker is not working.
Well, Mike, you're a techie guru. What is this?
I know he asked if we can hear him, and I'll have to say the answer is no. You are unmuted, though. He'll type then. Okay. I think Michael's going to type his question or his comment.
Let's move on to the next one, Lita, and then when he gets his in, we'll address it.
Perfect. Okay.
The problem is we've got
Here we
some
go.
time issues here.
That's
I'll talk about this a little bit, then Mike will address your question, which may be broad enough that it's a problem.
Oh, here we go. Mike's question
so we can
is,
also comment on the competent item here. Again, what's competent, what's their 3, 8, 9. So I want you to all be thinking about that. So let's get Mike's question.
he is saying, my question is that fact that the student has to exceed expectations to get a 10. So the question is the fact that the student has to exceed expectations to get a 10. In other words, to get 100%, they have to exceed expectations, which doesn't seem fair.
That's, you know, and that's a good point. I think that that brings up something that I think we need to be aware of as faculty. When we implement this new 10-point rubric, we need to make sure that our students understand what it means, and we need to point out to them in the initial announcement, hey, we're going to these new 10-point rubrics. Please take a look at the rubric, and you'll see that if all you do is meet the performance criteria described in the rubric, you're going to get an 8 or a 9. If you fully meet it, you're probably going to get a 9. You need to go beyond that and actually just have just an amazing performance to get 100%. And I would argue that is an expectation across the board in higher education. Just because somebody does the assignment doesn't mean they get 100%. Now, if you're grading a quantitative item, okay, such as the student is doing a math problem or the student is writing a computer program, there's potential to say, wait a minute, I can't take anything off. It's perfect. Okay, that's fine. But I think when you're writing a paper or you're doing an analysis or you're doing a design, there are different levels in there. Like you could be saying, I want you to, just for example, create 4 entities that represent this problem in a database. Well, the student could create the 4 entities, but some people could create, have more attributes, better attributes. In other words, it could get into that exceeding. But I think the point is, Mike, that from now on, again, we've had some serious grade inflation within the program, and we want our students, we don't want to be giving away 10s like we gave away 4s. And we have a better way of differentiating, and a lot of this has to do with, from a student perspective, if you've got a really good student who is consistently really putting out there and just doing an outstanding job, and another student who's just barely meeting the performance criteria, they're meeting it, should they both get the same grade? And I think our answer now is no. We have the ability to differentiate and give that outstanding student a 10, give the student who's just meeting the criteria barely either an 8 or a 9, depending on the level of which they meet it. So that's what we're trying to instill as, again, we're just trying to set some new guidelines for how we want faculty to grade within the program. Now, you as a faculty member, you still have the ability to assign what you feel is right and what you feel is correct. But what we're trying to do here is say these are the guidelines that within our program we would like to see faculty using. So I hope that answers your question. And thank you for that.
John Craddock has his hand up. I'm going to unmute you, John.
Yes,
John, do you have?
Heard?
We can hear you.
Okay,
Vague. It's very low in the background.
hang on. Let me see if I can raise the volume of this.
There you go. Maybe it's a little better now.
Okay. Let me answer the previous question of mastery in conjunction with this. When I look at mastery, I define that as the embodiment of the knowledge in the person's communication. So in other words, I'm not looking for a student who copies from various sources to put a paper together and that's their response. That doesn't show mastery to me. In fact, that might not even show competence. All that shows to me is that they know how to find specific terminology so that they can try to get a good grade out of it. But what I do is I monitor the student activity in the discussion board, and then I look at the assignments they submit and to see if their discussion commentary matches the way they approach the assignment. If it shows embodiment, then it's probably a 9.5 or a 10. If it is reasonably well described in their own terminology using key attributes, then it's probably a 8, and it might be a 9 if it's very, very clear and very precise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does. And you know, John, I think you've kind of hit 2 points there. One is, and I think this is especially true with a smaller class being 5 to 15 students. You can get to know your students well enough fairly quickly through their discussion comments, and you can link those to their application comments and work with it. I think when you're looking at larger classes, 20 to 30 students, it's a little more challenging to keep that all straight, especially if you have several classes at that level. But that is a good point, and I think that as faculty, to the extent we can do that, we need to, you know, take our feedback and our comments and even our grading directly to the student and where they're at, what they're doing. So, yeah, I agree. I think that's a great comment.
May I raise one more point?
please.
Yeah, we are faced with a problem looking down the path as I see it. I've been here since '97 as a student and since '03 as an instructor. There's a culture of GPA, not only here but in most universities. And while the GPA doesn't mean a damn thing to most people in the world, including employers, the students hold that as a badge of honor. And the moment you're going to start taking away those 4.0 and 3.9 and all those other GPAs based on an honest evaluation now, I think we're going to have enormous pushback, and I think we're going to have potentially a loss of students because they'll go someplace where they can get a better grade from easier grading. And I think lastly, in conjunction with this, what I've seen over the years is a significant inconsistency among faculty who grade papers. I teach the capstone, and I have students who come into my class who can't write. Now, after 4 years in the BSBA department, or 3 years, how on earth is that possible? So,
again, John, you've raised two very important points. Let me address both of those. The first one, this is going to be a rude change for students. That has been mentioned several times amongst the faculty team that's worked on developing this rubric and putting it out here. And as faculty, again, I think we need to take that bull by the horns. And the very first announcement when you're using this rubric, you need to tell the students. You know, we had the 4-point rubric before. Now we've got a 10-point. Whereas before you may have gotten a 4, you're maybe going to get an 8 or a 9 now. Okay? And whereas maybe before you got a 3, you may be getting a 7 or a 6 or even a 5 now. So we need to address that for our students. The second issue, is that going to cost us students? That's possible. But I mean, the only response I can give to that, and I think you would give the same response, is do we at Walden want to be known as a diploma mill? You go in there and no matter what you turn in, you get a 4? Or do we want to be known as a school where you have to do the work, we measure your quality, and let me add one thing, the faculty gives you feedback that can improve your quality and your success in your learning. Now, is that going to cost us some students? I agree with you. I think up front it may cost us some students. But I'm willing to bet you that in the long run, 3 to 4 years from now, that the word's going to get out. If you want to learn stuff, get good feedback from the faculty and not just get all 4s with comments that say, great job, nice job, when you know damn well you didn't put that much work into it, you go to Walden and they're going to teach you what you need to know. And I think that's our goal here. And I think that, you know, not only would our program director, John Stachel, agree with that, but I think our associate dean, Ward Ulmer, would back that, our VP, you know, Paul Thomas would back that, and I'm willing to bet you that if we took this right up to Cynthia Baum, she'd say, you go boys, or girls, whatever. But I just think that that's my answer, okay?
Well, I completely concur with you, but I'm still concerned about the variations in feedback from faculty member to faculty member, as we saw in the grading rubrics that you had in the first assignment.
Okay, and the whole purpose behind having this webinar is to try and reduce that. As you saw in that one slide, I mean, I went into some classes in the lower one. In a given class, it was taught, you know, like 6 times during the year. I had it taught by one faculty member 3 times, and literally every student had A's. And I had another faculty who taught the same class 3 times, and those students had A's, B's, C's, and D's. You know, that, to me, that's an issue that the program directors and associate deans and lead faculty need to be addressing. And if they see that happening in faculty members' classrooms, they need to say, hey, you need to get this straightened out. For those who are willing and interested in taking the time to actually assign appropriate grades and give appropriate feedback, we're hoping that through this webinar that we can get some consistency in how those grades are actually applied. So,
thank you for your
insights. It's a little heavy-handed maybe, but I think it's the direction that our administration and faculty want to see us going.
I certainly do. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on, Lita. Okay, I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. You know, I think we've actually already addressed this. I think a couple of the people who raised their hands talked a little bit about what we're looking for here. And, you know, this is C work. Now, Does that mean that we're trying to set up a bell curve where a C is 60% of our students are getting 7s? No, that's not the idea at all. Matter of fact, the whole idea behind a rubric is we set up a standard. As the students achieve the standard, they get the appropriate grade. Would I consider it, especially in a junior or senior class, wrong if every student received an A in the class? Not necessarily, as long as they all achieved it and did the work. So, so 7, again, these are students we need to give a lot of feedback to and help them move forward. Next slide. And finally, on this one, one of the things that the question I ask here is how do we distinguish between deficient and minimal work? And I think, again, this is a very individual thing amongst faculty. We're professionals, and we can kind of understand this. I think the challenge is for us to explain that to our students. Why is it that this work that they completed is a 6? What do they need to do to get to a 7, an 8, a 9, or even a 10? Or at least get them up to an 8 or a 9, okay? And if we're giving them a 1 through 5, we're basically telling them, hey, you need to step up. I know I've had students, because I will give I give D's and I give F's every now and then on assignments, and students turn stuff in, and I do get, as I think it was John indicated, I do get some pretty serious negative feedback from the students of, wait a minute, I've never gotten grades like this before. And I just tell them, look, this is what I expect. I will work with you on this. Let me help you on the next assignment if I can. And I'll tell you what, I do, we're going to lose some students because of that. But on the other side of that, you will receive very positive feedback from other students who go, here's an instructor who cares, who makes me work, a tough instructor, but they give me positive feedback. If you give students 6s or 7s, and you don't tell them why and what they can do to improve, you are going to get serious blowback. It's our responsibility, though. I mean, that's if we cannot give our students feedback and tell them how to improve, what's the good of them even bothering to come to our institution? They can go read a book. Okay, so again, we have to keep moving on. I'm sorry, but I want to try and stay within our time frame. I'd love to get a little more feedback, but I think you've given us good feedback so far. One issue that we do want to do a polling question on, and everybody is welcome to participate in this poll. With a 10-point rubric, should we limit ourselves to whole numbers, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, or should we allow decimals? Okay, and basically, this was a discussion amongst our faculty team, and the faculty, about half of them said, hey, whole numbers are the only way to go. That's what's on the rubric. It's enough differentiation. You take a look at how faculty evaluate. You've already seen the spread. How can we expect them to even be able to determine the difference between an 8? If we cannot expect them to consistently know the difference between an 8 and a 9 and a 7, how can we expect them to add in an 8.5? The other side of the coin is, if I have 3 papers here, one is clearly a 9, one is clearly an 8, and I've got another paper that's in between, I want to give them an 8.5 so I can differentiate. Okay? So I want you to all think about that, and you're going to get a chance to vote. Now, we're just putting this, we're putting this as data together, and we're going to decide sometime within the next week or two and make a recommendation to the faculty. And it'll, again, it's just a guideline of whether we want to see them using all whole numbers or if they can use decimals. So let's move on to the next slide. So basically, Lita's going to do the polling tool here, and you can either vote, I believe in only whole numbers, or I believe in whole numbers and decimals, or I have no opinion. So anybody have any comments on that before we go into this that maybe I haven't already addressed, another perspective? Okay, let's open the poll, Lita.
All right. Here, John, I'm having a little problem with the poll because I launched it and closed it really fast. If you want to come right back to this and perhaps move to the next slide, and then we'll come right back. Sorry about that.
Okay, the poll is up. Oh, I see what happened. Okay.
Right. It closed. My error. Okay, if you want to go on the slide, and then I'll come right back.
Sure. Okay, I've talked quite a bit about feedback, and feedback, I feel, is a very, I hate to use the word personal thing for faculty, but I think it is. Some faculty give lots of feedback. Some faculty don't give any feedback, which is bad, or all they say is good job, not good job, make it better. That's not acceptable. So basically, I tried to give an example here of some feedback to Sally, who's just a random student who got the following evaluation, 10.867. So I always start out with something positive. We all know this from feedback. Good start. Be sure to follow through with the responses to all the assignments. But then, you know, she got an 8 on the justification, and the reason is she didn't really describe all the components. I'm sorry, it was configure. Well, I gave her a 10 in configuration. Oh, no, I'm sorry. She got a 10 in configuration because she did include a description of all components. However, when it got down to justification, she didn't completely describe the usage requirements under cost or cost estimate. She did no comparison shopping. So that one she got hit really hard on. I mean, she didn't even meet the criteria. Under form and style, she got a 7. It looks like she had 1 or 2 misspelled words. And I'm recommending she contact a writing center. If I ever give anybody a form and style grade of a 7 or less, especially a 6 or less, I always recommend they contact a writing center. And then finally, the assignment was turned in 2 days beyond the due date, so we took off some points for that, but we'll talk about that in a future slide. So how are we doing on the poll, Lita?
We are doing, I am
so
still working on it.
We'll go on to the next slide, Lita. You just let me know when the poll's ready. We can
I will, thanks.
Okay. Okay, so again, just briefly running through the rubric. Again, we're running short on time here. Weights, I think we all know that weights are assigned when the course is created and the rubrics are created. And this is the point at which the subject matter expert on the faculty needs to get involved and say, how are we going to weight the different items in the rubric? Okay, next slide. Points are a calculated value. You take the evaluation the student got times the weight gives the points. Next slide. Possible points, again, this is determined at the time that the course is created by TSID and the subject matter expert. Next slide. Okay, the late work adjustment. This is something that actually after we created the initial version of the 10-point rubric with the faculty team that did that, we sent the rubric out to the faculty at large within the VSCIS and VSIT programs. And there were a couple recommendations that came out. Actually, one was a change in our definition of competent, which was the 8 to 9 scale. But the other was faculty said, wait a minute, we need to have a late work adjustment when students turn things in late. So we've included this late work adjustment, and the reason is in this way, when we measure, when we assess student achievement of unit and program outcomes, the fact that they turn the work in late is not figured into that calculation or that assessment. So just so you know, currently within our program anyway, I can't speak for other programs, but within our program, different syllabuses actually say different things for how late work should be handled. And so the undergraduate program directors are right now developing a standard. It's going to be set up as a guideline for how to handle late work across the entire undergraduate curriculum. And according to John Stachel, my program director, this should be coming out within the next few months. I think we're all going to be really glad to see that when it does come out. And actually, even now, I think you need to, in your initial announcement, tell your students exactly what your standards are on late work. Okay? Let's go on to the next slide, Lita.
And, you know, I do have that polling question. I don't know if you want me to launch it now or after you go
through
the next
Let's go ahead
slide.
and do the polling question.
Okay, and I apologize about that. Here's the polling question. Do you prefer whole numbers when using a rubric, or whole numbers and decimals, or no opinion? You can just take a moment, please.
Like I say, you're all welcome to vote on this.
And we are getting a lot of votes. This is great. Okay, due to time, I'm going to close the poll here in the next moment. We have 56% or 59% of the attendees. Perfect.
You know, that's an interesting number. You guys voted exactly the same as last night's group did. I mean, exactly. That's just phenomenal. Okay, so it looks like everybody feels the whole numbers are more the direction to go, and then we'll pass that information forward when the final decision is made as to the guideline we're going to be using. Thank you for that. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, Lita. Okay, again, here's, we want to take a look at this late work adjustment. And again, unless previous arrangements were made with the instructor, so the instructor always has the freedom if the student contacts them ahead of time and says, hey, I'm sick, my kid's sick, you know, whatever, the instructor can make exceptions to the late work assignment. And basically what you do is you enter a negative number in the point column and it's calculated into the student's score. Let's go on to the next slide. For discussions, there's a little more involved in that. It's not only whether the initial posting is late, but in our program, BSIT and BSCIS, we largely, almost always, expect students to respond to at least 2 colleagues' posts. What if they only respond to 1? You have the option of taking points off, or if they respond to none. And again, it's just important that you post to the students in the announcement what your expectations are here and how many points it's going to cost them. Okay, next item. Okay, total points is calculated automatically. I don't think we need to spend any time there. Again, starting March 4th, all BSIT core courses will have their 10-point rubric. Starting with the April 15th term, this should be integrated into all BSIT courses. So if you're still teaching a non-core course on March 4th, you're still going to see the 4-point rubric. But starting April 15th, we've been promised by course maintenance they'll have them all in there. If that changes, we'll let you know. And in the BSCIS, we're projecting to get the 10-point rubric out by July 15th. But first, we have to go in and change the 500 rubrics that are in the BSCIS program, and then have course maintenance to input those new items. Okay, next slide. So, you know, how do we use these? Basically, again, these are going to be in an Excel spreadsheet format. So you just download that Excel spreadsheet for each assignment, enter the evaluation points and feedback, and that information will automatically then calculate the total points the students get. I say copy and paste the rubric into the gradebook. You can either do that or you can put it in as an attachment. Okay, so it's your choice. You can either cut and paste or put it in as an attachment, and then you enter the assignment points that were calculated in the rubric into the actual gradebook itself. I don't really have time for questions now. By the way, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, write them down, send me an email. We're going to be giving you my email later. It's just john.borton@waldenu.edu. 4-point rubric. We still have some 4-point rubrics out there. We talked about the problems with them. You know, what's a 4, what's a 3? Do you use decimals or not? Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this is what our 4-point rubric looks like right now. And again, this was designed for assessment, not grading. Everybody knows what the problem is. Just very quickly, student, look at the number 3 row. The student does excellent work, complete, meets the performance indicators. We're going to give them a 3. What did we just give them? A 75%, a C. Not appropriate. Every faculty member had to do something with this, and it was a problem. So this is the main reason we're moving away from the 10-point rubric. Next slide, please. So in the meantime, what do we do with these 4-point rubrics? Let's go to the next slide. We're going to recommend a conversion. So basically, if you have a student who, and you're still teaching a class with the old 4-point rubric, which should only be the non-core courses, and they do exceptional work, a 4 is equivalent to a 10. But what if they're doing excellent work, equivalent to an 8 or a 9? We're just recommending you just convert it. So basically, if you take 4 times 8 actually times 0.8, you get 3.2. If you take 4 times 9, you get 3.6. So just do a simple conversion there. If you would normally, if they're approaching a performance indicator and you give them a 7 under the 10-point rubric, give them a 2.8. And if they're developing competence and you normally give them a 6, give them a 2.4. There is no description for a minimal, but if they're doing F work, you can just give them between a 0.4 and a 2. I hope that's clear to everybody. Again, if you have questions, please email me. Okay, we're going to run over by about 5 or 10 minutes. I apologize for that. But we would like you to all complete one final student assignment so we can calculate some inter-rater reliability and compare it to the inter-rater reliability values we calculate before you went through the webinar. So what we're doing is we're trying to see if how good a job we did at presenting a discussion of and trying to bring you all together on how to apply these 10-point rubrics. Now, this is where you need to pull out the assignment that was mailed to you prior to the class. You need to pull out the rubric that was mailed to you before the class, because all we're going to give you is the student's response. Okay? And you need to have 4 values that you're going to enter. We're going to poll you on this, but we're going to try and give you maybe 8 minutes to complete this assignment. So let's take a look at the assignment, Rita. Okay, so here's an assignment. Again, this was an actual assignment completed by a student. Again, we're going to give you 8 minutes to read through this. Again, you have a copy of the assignment in front of you. For those of you that did the pre-work, you already know what it is. If you didn't, you need to read it. It's going to take a little time, and then complete the rubric. So I'm going to shut up for about 8 minutes. And by the way, everybody can participate in this one. I don't know if I said that. Somebody's got quite a rhythm going there.
That's not me. Hey. Would you say about 2 or 3 more minutes, John?
Sure.
Perfect.
If anybody would like more time, why don't you raise your hand real quick? Otherwise, I think in about 15 seconds, we're going to do the poll.
Great suggestion. All right, no hands are raised. I'm going to launch the poll. And the first one will be Carol and what you ranked her for her configuration. About 28% in. Give you a few more moments. All right, we have about a 36% response rate for Carol configuration. I'm going to close the poll. And these are the results.
Okay, I wouldn't say that we've necessarily come a lot closer together, but looks like everybody thinks Carol should have got, on average, around a 7.5. And again, what I want you to do is take a look at your score compared to how everybody else scored and just think, you know, what is it that they saw that made their score higher than mine or lower than mine? If we had more time, we could talk about it. Let's go on to the next item and try and enter your poll items fairly quickly.
Perfect. Carol, justification should be up on your screen right now. Okay, that's another 32% voted, so I'm going to close the poll. And these are the results that we have.
Yeah, it looks like Carol was kind of lacking just some justification there. I assume that most of the people in the 1 to 60 that gave a 5 or a 6. So again, just kind of think about why did somebody rank lower than you? Why did somebody rank higher? you know, and why do your faculty members feel, why do your colleagues feel that they should be giving different rankings than you? And, you know, it doesn't mean you necessarily want to change yours. It's just something to consider. Next item.
Cheryl and cost is the next one that should get on your screen. Okay, we're at about 27%. If anyone has any last minute, okay, 31%. Okay, I'm going to be closing the poll at 31%. And this is what we have.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, move on to the next one. Okay, the last one is form and style. Okay, 31% have voted. I'm going to close it. 35% actually. Thank you. And this is what we came up with.
Well, we got consistent on that one. Carol had some form and style issues. So, again, overall, I was a little surprised that we had such a wide spread after the webinar. But again, we had different people completing was part of it. But this is just data, and we're going to look at it. We're going to work with it. Appreciate you doing that. Let's move on to the next slide.
Absolutely.
And the next slide. Okay, so basically this is our last slide for the actual seminar itself. Apologize for running over. Next steps, we're going to be rolling out the 10-point rubric as we talked about before. Now, one of the things is that as these new rubrics come out, we may find errors in the rubrics as faculty members. As I say, there were over 500 rubrics that had to be redone, and then they had to be redone a second time. And if you didn't know anything about this little thing called operator error, can understand that there's probably going to be a little bit of that in there. So if you find an error, please submit a course maintenance form to your lead faculty member and get it corrected. If you're not sure how to do it, just notify your lead faculty member of the error, and he or she can submit the course maintenance request, or if necessary, contact me, and I can give you my opinion on it, or of course, John Statchell, the program director for the undergraduate programs. We will be doing a follow-up survey sometime during the March 4th term to get some feedback from faculty regarding the 10-point rubric and its effectiveness and any issues you maybe have with it. And then finally, sometime in the 2012-13 academic year, we're going to be, I mentioned this before, but in Blackboard, we're actually going to be changing from doing assignment level assessment to actually doing rubric item level assessment. For those of you who are involved in assessment understand the difference there. Again, we have to do a whole other webinar to really get into the details. But the bottom line is it means that we should be more accurately evaluating how well our students are achieving program level objectives is the bottom line. Okay? Does anybody have any final questions before we move on? I know we've run late, but you know, this is an opportunity. Again, send me an email. Okay, Lita.
Great. Well, we just want to thank you for participating. We really appreciate your participation and attentiveness during today's training webinar. If you have any questions, please contact John Borton at the email listed on the screen. That's john.borton@waldenu.edu. And I also ask if you can please take a few minutes to provide feedback regarding how your webinar experience was today by completing the following survey link. It's on your screen, and I also copied and pasted it in the chat area, so you can just click on that link there as well. Thank you very much for attending, and we appreciate all of your feedback, your comments, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.